here with us Tsudik, the Chancellor Professor at the University of California, Irvine, the Director of the Secure Computing Networks Center, something like that. He's a leading expert in computer security issues. Today he's going to talk to us about security and countermeasures in social networks and privacy issues and so on. I would like to tell you all about that. Thank you, Jane, for being here.
Thanks, Michalis. Thank you for having me here. And this is your second lecture, and I guess it's standing between you and lunch, so let's hope I keep you awake. So I think the first lecture was on crowdsourcing, right? This morning? Seems like it would be, I think it will be somewhat related to at least a part of this talk. So the beginning we'll talk about online social networks and privacy in the context of online social networks. Specifically, we're going to look at privacy of authorship. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And we'll also discuss some countermeasures to the loss of privacy. So that's me, as Michalis said, and just to acknowledge my collaborators, some of this stuff here is a joint work with former PhD students. At least one of them was a contemporary of Michalis in the US at UC Irvine. Anyway, this is my works. And this, just to give you an idea of who I am, because you probably never heard of me before him announced. So I'm a security researcher. I've been doing security research, privacy security research for the last 25 to 30 years or so. Before security was sexy. So this is the current research topics that I look at in my lab. And so these two, we will talk about these two today. Okay, because these are related to social networks, and this summer school is focused on social networks. But I also do lots of other stuff. In fact, this used to occupy a lot of my time. Today, I don't really work in this area anymore. But until recently, I did. Today I work on economic security and privacy. If you're interested, I can explain or tell you more about this later. Security of IoT devices, something that consumes a lot of my cycles and occupies several of my PhD students. Is a very kind of hot topic, as you can imagine. Privacy in outsourced databases or in outsourced in the cloud, storage, computing. Also, this is mostly cryptographic topic. On a completely different end of the spectrum, I work on usable security, because the idea is that the security techniques designed by security researchers may be well secure and private, but oftentimes they are not usable by actual human beings. So therefore it's important to look into this area, and this is where I collaborate with HCI researchers to assess usability and design methods that are actually usable. I also, this is more of a hobby, I'm interested in new kind of biometric techniques and what's called de-authentication methods. Actually, if you don't know what that is, probably everybody knows biometrics, but maybe you don't know what de-authentication is. I can explain offline. Last but not least, this also takes quite a bit of my time, is security and privacy in so-called future internet architectures. Future because, well, anticipated, right? So today's internet is built on something on IP, right? Internet protocol. Most people say TCP/IP, but actually it's not true. It's built on IP. That's the lingua franca of today's internet, and that is aging rather poorly. So it's been what 40-something years since the design of the internet, 45 years, and it's been working miraculously, but nobody really knows why, and nobody really knows when and how it will break. But it will at some point, and therefore a number of alternative or next generation internet architectures have been designed in a vacuum, in a lab, and proposed. And I've been looking at, for the last 5-6 years, in the security and privacy of those internet architectures. You want more info? You can go to my lab webpage. Thank you very much. Okay, so enough about me. So it's kind of a rough outline. I'm going to try to introduce the problem, talk about authorship linkability, and then, which is where privacy is lost, and then we'll talk about some countermeasures, in particular authorship anonymization, and then we'll conclude. And now, this is where it gets a bit fuzzy or uncertain. Depending on the time it takes us to cover this, we may just end here, depending on how many questions you have or how slow I talk. Or we can go into two other topics which are related. One of them is essentially the same kind of linkability and authorship anonymity in microblogging, which is a bit of a kind of a specific to Twitter. And the other topic, perhaps a little more interesting because it's not exactly in the same domain, is offline social network as opposed to online. And offline with privacy, so we'll see, depending on where time will take us. So this is kind of our OSN universe, right? I'm not trying to be exhaustive here. Clearly there are some funny little symbols or mottos that I didn't show yet. But it's a very large universe, and surprisingly, a lot of people think of social networks as being just Facebook and Google Plus and Twitter. But actually, as I'm sure most of you know, because you're technical people, all these things are kind of social networks, right? And so is this, right? Everybody knows Flickr, right? Why is this a social network? Well, because people share photos, right? And with the photos, they share annotations, right? And all kinds of little stories that they attach to photos. So basically, it is a kind of a social network because you invite people to look. Yeah, Yelp is a social network. TripAdvisor is a social network. Amazon is a social network. Not Amazon Prime, not Amazon Marketplace. Amazon Reviews. Okay? Now, so I'm defining it as quite a broadly. Why I define it? Because, well, it is very social. You have to have an account, right? That unifies all these networks. You have to have an account to be a contributor. Right? They all have a notion of contributor, and they also have a notion of a reader, right, or a user. And some of them, like Yelp and TripAdvisor, you can be what's called a lurker, right? You're not don't need to be registered to be a user or reader of these networks. For some of the others, like Facebook, you unless the page is open, you need to be a member. You need to be registered. So there is quite some variety, right? And then there's Reddit, and of course you can also consider 8chan and 4chan to be social networks too. But I think it was more of like an anti-social networks, because they're a bit extreme. Anyway, right? And I also don't include like things like in the rest of the non-Western world, like RenRen, right? It's probably got as many users as Facebook or close. Or VK, right? That's the Russian one. Yeah, Kontakte, which is also hugely popular in Russia, I think, or Russian-speaking world, where I think way more people use VK than Facebook. And also this more grown-up social network, right? For serious people, LinkedIn, right? Everybody, you know, all of a sudden kind of becomes more mature when they have a LinkedIn account. They say they don't have friends, they have connections. Job experience. Well, right, so as I said, some of these social networks are link-based and some are not. When I say link-based, I mean that some of them actually have explicit links between users, like Facebook, right? You have friends and LinkedIn. And some don't, like TripAdvisor, Yelp, they don't have links between users, but they're still social networks. I take a very kind of a skeptical view of social networks. It's probably because of my age. So I don't use social networks. Okay, I look at them, it amuses me, but I don't use them. So I view it as a kind of a global haven for voyeurs and exhibitionists. Right? Everything is like, let me look at everything other people do and let me expose everything I can about myself. which is very nice. I think you know, there's a whole new branch of psychology that opened up with this, and therapy for social networking. But on the positive side, well, actually, it is undeniable that they touch many aspects of daily life for billions of users today, all over the world. There's probably no part of the world, including even you know, North Korea and Bhutan, and you know, that doesn't use social networks. So there is no denying enormous worldwide popularity. And this is important, as all of you know this too, that the membership in some of these networks is a gateway to other services. You know, in the US we use the word a gateway drug. Does everybody know what that means? We usually like gateway drug is like if you become a drug addict, the first drug you try, like marijuana. Oh, it's a gateway drug because you start with that and then you go to heroin and cocaine. So Facebook is a gateway drug, right? Because you start with Facebook and then it becomes a gateway into other things. Right? Because with Facebook, you can now register for many services. You can log in, right? In particular, they provide something called single sign-on, which is very convenient and very evil in many ways, if you think about it. Evil because of privacy implications. Because every time you use your Facebook credentials, somebody somewhere knows a lot about what you're doing. Okay, but that's just a political statement on my part. There's this other condition called multiple personality disorder, right, that's known in psychology. But in the social network world, what is multiple personality disorder? Well, it's just basically creating different accounts. The same person having multiple accounts. I'm sure that probably half of you here have multiple accounts. Yes? Please admit your sins. How many of you have multiple social network accounts? It's okay. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous, you know.
On the same service.
Yeah. No, well, no. Actually, I mean, no, not even on the same service. No, across. So surely most people have more than one, right? Is there anybody here who has more than one account on the same social network? One person. Two. Okay. Three. Four. Okay. Okay. Give it more time. Maybe more hands. So, look, the reasons are sometimes pretty obvious. Maybe these guys, the four people who just raised their hands, can correct me if I'm wrong. But first of all, there's a diverse purposes. So people who have multiple accounts on different social networks, right? So you have a Facebook and a LinkedIn and so on. That makes perfect sense, right? Because they serve different purposes. There are some general blogs. Well, Facebook is like a general blog, like basically kind of diarrhea, blah, everything, you know. Microblogs, which restrict output, which is like Twitter, and then professional ones like LinkedIn, right? Or media ones like Flickr, or TripAdvisor, which basically all about travel and rating hotels and restaurants, right? And then Yelp is rate everything and so on. So clearly there's reasons for a socially active person to have multiple accounts on different OSNs. And then why people have multiple accounts on the same OSN, well, this is where, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because of the different roles, right? So there's, for example, me as a Gene Tsudik private person who has, I don't know, certain hobbies, and I like to tell the world about my hobbies because the world would be so much poorer without them. And then there's me, the professor, you know, I want to put, I don't know, every time, you know, professors, we have resumes about this thick, and every time you use the bathroom, it means you publish a paper or file a patent, you want to add to your resume, you want to post immediately on your Facebook saying, hey, look, I was accepted in the 33rd Chinese underwater basket weaving conference, you know. Okay, so that, all kinds of, and then there's work, right? So that's me, professor, but other people have jobs, real jobs. So maybe you have an account for your job, and you have an account for personal, maybe you have an account for family. Did that cover reasons? Okay. Are there any other reasons you may want to have multiple accounts on the same social network? Let me know.
To troll people.
To troll, yeah, okay, that's the other. So this is positive. I assume you guys are nice people. Yeah, but if you want to troll somebody, you know, and harass them and hound them, yeah, for sure. For sure, yeah. So there are some obvious negative consequences of linkability. Linkability means What if somebody can link your account on Facebook to your account on some other social network? Or if somebody can link your account on Facebook to your other account on Facebook? Now, maybe in case of the guys who raised their hands here, this is not a problem, because you look like upstanding citizens, and surely you don't cyberbully anybody or post incitement to genocide and things like that. Or sell drugs, I assume. So, you have legitimacy. But for people who want to hide this linkage, there's usually a pretty good reason why they do it. It may be a nefarious reason, or it may be a pretty good reason. But there are negative consequences. One of them is that, let's say you are trying to get a new job, and what is very common in the Western world today, I don't know if it's true here in Cyprus, but certainly common in the UK and France and the US, is that there are specialized firms that focus on background checking. And they basically try to identify, given a name in your resume, they'll try to identify your social network accounts. Whether you tell them or not, they will find your social network accounts, and they'll trawl through content, you know, which can go back quite far, and they'll go through Twitter dumps, right? Because you can get, like, you know, even for restricted Twitter accounts, you can get dumps. And they'll go through those and try to look at questionable statements and you know, drug use, etc. So this is potentially a large privacy hole. The other thing is governments, right? Especially governments that are not so nice and friendly, oppressive governments, right? And surely you don't have to look far. You know, if in Cyprus, I guess you have to stand on the highest mountains and look far away. You probably will see some countries with oppressive governments. So there are governments who like to stick their nose into this business, and if they can link accounts, they can potentially identify dissidents or just people who express critical opinions. And then, of course, there's OSNs themselves. Now, you may think, well, the Facebooks and Twitters and others of this world, they are competing with each other. So they don't share information. That is actually not true. They do share information. Just like often political powers, right? Countries that are not friends share intelligence information. But especially if you have multiple accounts on the same social network, right? That's useful information for them, right? They can push advertising, customized advertising to you, etc. Okay, and oftentimes it's not so easy to escape detection, because if you are a naive person, not very privacy conscious, you probably, let's say Michael, you said you have more than one account, let's say on Facebook, I assume. So if you log in from home, they'll see that the provider IP address is the same. So they might, after a while, deduce that you're operating both accounts. Now, they already know. I mean, now if you go through Tor, for example, right, if you use Tor, and everybody I hope knows what Tor is, if you use a Tor browser, probably not so easily. But then Tor browser doesn't do anything for the content you post. And this leads us to the real subject of this talk. So, and also it can be dangerous, and I'm highlighting some countries in this world, including my own, where this could be, you could run into trouble. And some of the things, I mean, I don't have a very firm opinion on this. Some of these examples I'm going to give you, it's, you could question, right? So something like this, like in Venezuela, where people were arrested for criticizing banking system, that's pretty oppressive by any standard, I would say. And this really happened. Here was somebody was arrested for reporting police movements at the G20 meeting. That one, I guess, depends on which side of the issue you are in, but still, heavy-handed. This, India is a famously corrupt society in terms, this one in government, when it comes to government, and somebody being arrested for questioning the sudden rise in wealth of some son of a minister, he gets thrown in jail. That's pretty heavy-handed by any means. And then, UK, this is surprising, right? Okay, UK, it's supposed to be fairly free and freedom of speech, but it's not like the US. So in the US, this wouldn't happen. But in UK, they try to be sensible, right? And sensitive. So depending, I mean, this could be viewed as heavy-handed or a totally correct thing to do. But this is what actually happened. Somebody made anti-Muslim statements. They were tracked and arrested. On the other hand, linkability can be good if you look at it from the point of view of the benevolent government, the benevolent operator, and evil users, right? So now if the users are evil, and they are basically spam reviewers, or just in general spammers, or they're posting phishing messages, right, with these hidden links on their OSN webpage. Let's see, they advocate or promote illegal activity, right? So of course, genocide, pedophilia, these are the hot buttons, right? I'm sure you can come up with a bigger list, right? Human trafficking, terrorist threats, etc. All of this. So in this sense, most reasonable people agree. Oh, okay, maybe tracking and linking accounts of such people. So I'm specifically talking about the situation like this. You have a user named Alice, who's operating a social network account under her own name, Alice. And then she opens an account under Drusilla, okay? And under Drusilla, she is advocating some or all of these illegal activities, right? Now, normally you can't link them, but if you could, well, then you know who Drusilla really is. It's Alice, right? That's what I mean by linkability, and that it can be good. All right, let's take a concrete example. By the way, you are most welcome to ask questions. Yeah? And we don't have to wait till the end. So let's say we have a user, a guy named Jerry. And Jerry lives in Dublin, in Ireland. So he has a social network account on Twitter, and he's a big fan of Irish beer. He goes to the Temple Bar, which is a famous place. He likes animals, so he loves the Dublin Zoo, and all things green. And that's his real persona, right? That's like where he's himself. But unfortunately, Jerry also suffers from throat cancer. So on a different social network platform, blogger.com, he operates an account, an anonymous account, a pseudonymous account, under TC, Throat Cancer Survivor 007. That's his handle. And so on this account, he blogs about group therapy and referrals to oncologists, and it's whatever the blog platforms do. So it's a different world, and for many reasons you can imagine, Jerry doesn't want those two accounts to be linked or linkable. He doesn't. It's a private thing, right? He doesn't want his coworkers to know. May not want his family to know, for all I care. It's his right. So linkability would violate it. So the problem we're facing is, using this example, is how can Jerry and this Throat Cancer Survivor 07 be unlinkable? How can we make them unlinkable? But before we do, we have to see, are they linkable? And what it takes for them to be linkable. And so we'll attempt to do two things. Show that linkability works. And in particular, we're going to look at linkability based on stylometry. Okay? So this is getting a little more specific. Stylometry, I'm sure you all know what that means. And in particular, it works even for non-prolific users. And the prolific users, I'll try to define that later, but as the name suggests, people who contribute a lot. So you don't have to be super prolific. Yeah.
Define stylometry.
Yeah. So actually, the definition is common. But the common understanding of the word stylometry is the way you write. Right? It's all Greek-based, right? Like most of these terms, right? It's the manner in which you write. And then, so the second thing we try to do is explore some ways of fixing this linkability. All right, so linkability. I will just remind you that a typical social network, not all of them, but most of them, in addition to the content, the actual pictures, movies, text, titles, subtitles, whatever, or labels, they also have this metadata, which typically includes who, where, and when. Right? The who is always there. Right? From Amazon reviews to Twitter to any social network is the who. Even Reddit has a who, right? Who is that user? Now, it may not be the real name, but usually it's not. But it's a handle that somehow is persistent, right? Because you can then identify an account. So that's the who. Where is the geolocation tag? Sometimes it's automatic. In some social networks it's optional. Some don't have it. But often there is a where part. And then the when is usually also there, right? These two are pretty much omnipresent in all social networks. Just when something was posted. And this metadata, all three of these, have been extensively used in various studies by other researchers. We have not used them so much, but they've been used. And the interesting thing is, of course, you can do, there's a lot of privacy leakage that occurs based on this, right? Because sometimes you can see that somebody consistently posts at a certain time or from a certain place, and then you can link accounts like that. But it's a very limited source of linkability. Now back to stylometry. This is sort of more formal definition, not computer science formal, right? There are no Greek letters here, right? That would be a fit. No, it's just informally, but from the dictionary. There's a study of chronology and development of author's work based especially on the recurrence of particular turns of expression or trends of thought. Now, it's probably written by a Brit. It's a long, involved sentence. But really, if you parse it, it just says basically it's the way you write. Okay, so features of your writing, or your style. All right, so the first thing we did is we went with something that's pretty easy. We looked at Yelp. Why Yelp? Because Yelp is easy to crawl, or it was back then. I don't know if it still is, but over time, the crawlability of social networks changes, right? Depending on somehow I feel like the management is like a political system. Sometimes they have a liberal system, they allow people to crawl. Sometimes they become very anti-democratic and they close the doors and you can't, or you have to pay them. But back when we did this in 2012, 2013, Yelp was pretty free. You could crawl it and you can get a lot of data out of it, right? So we did an initial study with the Yelp data set, which had about 2,000 users, accounts, right? When I say users, I mean accounts. And the average, and these were fairly prolific types, right? So average was 539 reviews. So these are busybodies. These are people who either can't sleep or they're irritable. Or they, and then a small minority. I actually looked at those, right? Who posts so many reviews? Again, people who have like a sleeping problem and they need to occupy themselves. People who are just pissed off at the world, and every time a fly sits on their shoulder, they need to complain about the restaurant, or the toilet didn't flush right away, or something like that, right? Or people that are just super complimentary, that love everything, and they want to compliment everything. But those are rare, unfortunately. So typical review size was 150 words, which is not a lot. Like a paragraph and a half or so, maybe 2 paragraphs. It's not a very big review. And notice Yelp is a free style. It's not, and just a pointer forward, it's not like Twitter, where people use stupid abbreviations and contortions and then massage the language so they can stuff it into 140 characters and look at the weird stuff, right? No, here there's no hashtags, there's no linguistic contortions. People just write free text with full, usually grammatically correct sentences, which is nice for analysis. So the goal was, now, you might think, well, if you wanted to study linkability, what would you do ideally? Ideally, you would have some really anonymous users, okay? And you would be given a corpus or a body of reviews by those anonymous users, and you would be asked to map them to some non-anonymous users, right? That would be the ideal world study of linkability. But the world we live on is far from ideal. Yelp doesn't know and is not going to give us anonymous users, okay? And then open the door and let us have reviews of all other users, right? That's not going to happen. Maybe Yelp itself could do it, but they're not going to open this door for anybody else. So we were forced to do the only thing that was viable at the time, and still is the only thing that's viable when you try to study linkability. We took some users, like this, some set of users. For each user, there is a set of reviews. I have more slides coming up on this, but I'll just give you the intuition, right? So for each user, we have a set of reviews. We randomly select a subset of reviews from each user, okay? And we put those subsets in a box, right? And we pretend that box of subsets we just took are anonymous. We pretend we don't know who wrote them. Are you following me? We pretend. And then we apply some fairly unsophisticated machine learning algorithms to do feature extraction on the pretend anonymous subset and try to map them into those that are remaining, right? And the ones that we know who the author is, right? And we try to look at the probability of matching, and we see how accurate is the probability of correct match. Does that make sense? All right, so more detail coming. All right, so this is, and our goal is this. We have an anonymous set of reviews, and we want to link them. Right? So we have a set of, for a given user, we have an anonymous, pretend anonymous set of reviews. We want to link that set to some already identified user with hopefully high probability. So this is what I already sort of explained. We have a set of reviews. Let's say in this case we have 40 sets, 40 users we took. Each one had a bunch of reviews. We then, for each user, right, so let's say the user 2, we took and split that yellow set into anonymous record, which is a subset of pretend anonymous reviews, and identified record. We know that this is written by user number 2. This we pretend we don't know who wrote. Okay. And now the process. So for every anonymous, pretend anonymous subset, we use a link model to map that anonymous set of reviews to each identified review set with a probability. Each arrow here comes with a probability. Okay? And then we sort, right, in descending order, the probabilities. So the one appearing at the top is going to be most highly likely to be linkable, linked to. Okay, and we'll use what's called, and if you did any kind of elementary machine learning, you know this, or statistics, you know what this means, top T ratio, right? So top 1 means we guessed correctly, the highly rated probability appointed to the correct review. That's top 1. Top K means that the correct linkage occurred within the top K candidates. Right? So we look at top 1, top 2, top 5, top 10. Okay, you can vary this. And then you say, well, look, if for example, we deal with top 5, right? The idea is that top 5 accuracy is 100% if the correct identified review appears anywhere in the list of 5. So it's a little strange. If you've never heard of this concept, it's a little strange. So in this case, you see AR2, right, anonymous record 2, was linked to all of these identified records sorted in descending order, and then the most likely was IR3, which is incorrect. The next most likely is IR5, which is also incorrect. The next likely is IR2, which is correct. So we say if we were dealing with top 2 probability, this would be no hit, right? 0, miss, complete miss. Top 1, also miss. But if we say for top 3, this is accurate. Right? Does it make sense? It's also accurate for top 4, etc. For top 3, it's accurate. So we do it for everything, for all anonymous records. Right? So this is again just an illustration of linkability ratio. And zooming in a little bit, right, at more detail, for every right? So this is like n squared, right? Linkages, because for every, there are n, let's say there are n anonymous records and there are n identified records, so we have to do this n squared times. This is AR2 being potentially matched to IR1. Well, basically we extract features, which I'll tell you about in a minute. These set of stylometric features. And then we use what's called a distance function. This is the heart of the matter here, and this is the really trivial machine learning that we're using here. And in this case, we're using chi-square, which is a well-known function, distance function. And we compute the distance between the two distributions, right? And this is what yields a number that we can then sort on. Now, we tried other tests. Again, this is specific to the Yelp database, or Yelp dataset, which is free-form reviews. This is not going to hold for, let's say, photo captions or tweets. I'll tell you right away, because it's a different kind of language is used. It might also not hold for non-English, like maybe if this was Chinese, or if this was Greek, or if this was Icelandic, this might not be exactly the same, meaning that this approach would be the same, but maybe a different function would do better. Okay, this is a bit of a, it's not a science, this is an art. You have to play with different functions. So we tried a bunch of others, and in this case, the chi-square yielded the best results. So where did we, well, I said the word features. What do I mean by features? Well, luckily for us, there's been some work in analyzing in stylometry. Okay? And there's a seminal paper by two people who are not known in this community at all, but came up with this very nice typology or framework for extracting features from free-form text. And this is called right prints. And so if you're interested in this topic, I would highly recommend looking at that paper. It was designed essentially for this kind of operation, for similarity detection in writing, and it was originally, I think, used for plagiarism detection. So we use this wholesale, we use this right prints approach, and basically it enumerates a number of stylometric features. Now, it's not an exhaustive enumeration because you could clearly come up with many, many other measures of stylometry, but they're likely not to be effective, right? Just because you can measure something doesn't mean it's effective. So I'm also not going to enumerate everything. They have 22 static and dynamic characteristics, and total. So one of the characteristics is average number of characters per word. Okay, so let's say we have an example text. This is just one sentence. Irish pubs have great live music. So average characters per word is 4.5. Then there is the, this is a dynamic feature. This is a static feature, unigrams, right? There's a unigram distribution. Frequency of occurrence of every one of the 26 English alphabet letters. That's it. Some of this seem non-intuitive, right? Or counterintuitive, right? Like, why would monogram or unigram frequency distribution, why would that matter? But it does. Strangely, it does. And then there's bigram or digram. Right? So, two character distributions. Now, if you know, anybody here ever studied crypto? Ooh, one person. So you know in crypto, if you study the history, usually they start out with some ancient history, right? They tell you that, you know, there's this bigram, you know, this kind of unigram and bigram distribution is used in cryptanalysis. And for every language, there's well-known tables of distributions, right? Certainly for English there is, right? So there are certain bigrams that appear much more often, like TH in English, right? And the most common letters in English, so in monogram, used for trivial cryptanalysis, like E and T are the most common. And then you imagine that something like Q and Z are not so common, right? So this is counterintuitive because it seems like, well, you know, if you're writing in English, then everybody's unigram and bigram distribution has to be the same. But it's not. It's not.
that something becomes personal. And then there are others. Then another interesting, just an example of another feature is part of speech tag. Part of speech, adjective, noun, etc. Right? So in this case, this feature traces it into 3 adjectives, 1 verb, 1 noun, and 1 noun singular. Right? So so this is means adjectives, right? We have 3 adjectives in this sentence. We have 1 verb, have, right? We have 1 noun, this noun singular, right? And so, sorry, no, this is noun plural, and then 1 noun singular. Pubs and music, right? So basically, it's a count. It's a vector of counts of different parts of speech. So I'm, of course, using it on a ridiculous example of 1 sentence, but now imagine a review, right, or like a small essay, and using that for the entire thing. Turns out to be quite useful. Now, they are useful in different ways. Some are more useful than others. And we tried all of them. In fact, we did it rather gradually. First, we took a combination of all features, like threw them all together. And what we found is that our top 1 linkability ratio. Now, I remind you what it means. Top 1 means that the highest, most likely selected record was correct, which means right, that the top most likely record was correct, which means we were basically 100% correct if we are top 1 linkability. Well, we were 52.5% correct in selecting the top most, which is, depending how you look at it, is either encouraging or, we've considered it rather encouraging, right? So half the time, more than half the time, we were able to identify exactly essentially the other body of reviews. And for top 4, right? Remember, top 4 means somewhere in the first 4 was the correct linkage, was 82.5%. That's a little more impressive. Now we tried to consider each feature individually. So rather than combine, we considered each feature individually, sum it up. And here the top 1 linkability went up to an impressive 91%. That is quite an improvement. And the top 4 went to 96, which is not nearly as exciting. And it did jump, but not nearly by much. So the top 1 ratio is important. And then we did some ad hoc stuff. Turned out that combining trigrams, which is another feature, trigrams, that's 3-letter combinations, and part of speech bigrams. This one I didn't explain. Okay, this is a little obscure. Part of speech bigram means verb followed by noun, noun followed by noun, adjective followed by a verb, these kinds of bigrams of parts of speech. So, for reasons still unknown, that gave us the best performance. Okay, and we used actually a very small anonymous record size. So another thing I think I forgot to mention is when you're trying to do this kind of stylometric linkability, it's easy to do it if you have a very large corpus of anonymous records. Also a large corpus of identified records. But in the real world, this isn't the case, right? In fact, it'd be more interesting if you had fewer anonymous record reviews, right, or contributions. So in this case, the anonymous record size was 5, which means 5 reviews were, there were only 5 reviews that were anonymous. I mean, they were written by the same person, but there are only 5 of them. So it's not a very rich set from which to extract stylometric features. And still it worked pretty well. So this is a chart, sorry, right there. So this is AR equals 5, anonymous record 5, and this one shows the linkability for letter trigrams and what I call bigram parts of speech. Anyway, these charts are usually not very impressive because you probably can't see anything from far away. You just have to believe me that it looks good. But we did use, for feature selection, we used this something called greedy hill climbing algorithm that was designed by a machine learning person. So we're not doing research in machine learning. We're faithfully applying boring machine learning, well-known machine learning techniques. And then we varied the author set. So this is another interesting thing, is of course if you have very few authors to whom potentially to link, then the problem is easier. Right? But if you vary the authors, we varied it up to 1,000. Now of course, real Yelp doesn't have just 1,000 authors. Real Yelp has millions. Okay? But we didn't have that data. We imagined that we have something reasonable, like 1,000 potential authors to map into. And we varied sort of from 250 to 1,000, but this is the interesting one, right? So at 1,000, this would be top 1 linkability. So this would be around 77.5%. Top 1, so this is basically correct pick. We made a correct pick 77.5% of the time of mapping anonymous records of size 5 into an identified record of 1,000 authors. Okay, so that is impressive. And this is top 4, which is above 90. This distance is not very big. So, where are we now? Linkability turns out to be a lot easier than we thought. And that has been previously thought. Because before us, there have been other people who studied linkability, but most of them really focused on tiny sets of authors, like linking among the set of 50. Right? If you're dealing with very small pool, very small pool of potential authors, problems become a lot easier. So we were the first ones to scale it up. Now, there's way more to go. We could scale, ideally it should be scalable to millions. We haven't done it. Right? And we have some excuses why it's difficult to do, because you actually need to convince the OSN operators to share data. And there's some data that they will share with you. But this data we tried and they are not happy to share. In fact, they immediately climb up and say, no, sorry, not doing it. So it's easy. What can we do about mitigating it? Okay, now that we know that stylometry actually betrays a lot about the author. So the answer is we can try to anonymize authorship. Okay, that's the big answer. What about more concretely, right? What does it take to anonymize reviews? In particular, remember we're dealing with not general social network world, but we're dealing with the world of reviewing, right? So we remember Yelp was what we used originally, and we actually looked at Yelp and TripAdvisor because these are very similar sites. There's very similar flavor of writing. People review services and products, right? So we started thinking, and also in the kind of linkability there you see is interesting, because oftentimes what happens on this Yelp and TripAdvisor, the people who are criticized, it's usually not people who are complimented, but the businesses or whether it's airlines, restaurants, etc., they often react very negatively, right? And they often try to sort of troll and harass reviewers. How dare you to give me a negative review, you moron, you know, blah, blah, blah. I've seen this kind of thing. And there will be like active harassment. And sometimes they try to actually go offline and try to find out who reviewers are and harass them offline in the physical world. So there's pretty good reason, right, for reviewers to kind of not really tell the world who they are. See, the social network, it may well be okay for the social network to know that this reviewer and that reviewer are the same person. But it's not necessary for the subject of reviews, right? For the restaurant, or for the airline, or for the hotel to know. Right? So let's keep that in mind. Anyway, so what does it take to anonymize reviews? Well, first we have to ask, what do we want anonymization? Well, we want unlinkability, right? Clearly, that's the motivation. We want reviews to be, I should be able to like log into TripAdvisor or Yelp and review, let's say I'm staying in a hotel here in Limassol. I should be able to review my hotel positively or negatively or mixed of the two, and not worry about being hounded by the management. Okay? What, good, bad, or ugly, I don't care. I don't want them to hound me. At the same time, I want my review to be meaningful, right? So if something is done to change my review, to anonymize it, I want it to mean what I want, right? Even if it's changed visually, right? I still want it to convey the same message that I wanted. And of course, this anonymization should be easy to obtain. Because if it takes for me to learn Serbo-Croatian and translate it manually into Serbo-Croatian, and then ask a friend to translate it into Japanese, and then translate back to English, that's a little bit laborious, right? So it's not so easy. So there are two simple ideas, not rocket science. Anybody could come up with those ideas. One is, well, you know, I did the user translation example. We have machine translation. There's been significant advances in natural language processing in the last 20 years, 25 years, and there have been, for that reason, there have been also advances in machine translation. How many people ever use Google Translate? Yeah, okay. How many people find it funny? Okay, good. Somebody there had a sense of humor, right? So that's one obvious direction, and the other direction, maybe a little bit less obvious, is crowdsourcing. And so we're going to go in that order. We're going to first look at crowdsourcing. That's our sort of second contribution. Okay, crowdsourcing. Okay, there are many platforms for crowdsourcing. Also, crowdsourcing encompasses all kinds of activities and all kinds of sites, right? There are people who do all kinds of menial tasks, right? There are physical crowdsourcing things. But the best known crowdsourcing platform is Amazon Mechanical Turk, right? Anybody ever used it? Has anybody ever been employed by it? I know it's kind of funny to be asking in Cyprus if anybody been in Mechanical Turk, but no, nobody wants to admit to this. Right? Oh, you have been.
No, I tried some years ago.
Uh-huh.
When I was a student. I tried.
Yeah, he obviously did not pay you enough stipend, right?
I didn't have the option to even to be a worker as a citizen.
Seriously?
Yeah. I didn't have the option.
The Amazon would refuse you. They refuse.
You have to have a US-based bank
To be an M-Turker. Why? Indians don't have a problem.
No, it's US. That's why we have power.
Right. So that actually, okay, I didn't know this, but it is true. I always knew that India is overrepresented, right? And maybe for pretty obvious reasons, right? But U.S., I mean, yes, and I know in the U.S. there are a lot of people who do this, but typically for tasks requiring, like simple cognitive things, it's usually, you're gonna more likely to get people from India. Okay, but nobody used it. It's actually becoming, oh, you used it, okay. So I used it and my students used it, and it's becoming quite popular in certain kinds of, in particular HCI world, and also in experiments where people do mock-ups of various systems before they build them, and they try to get large-scale usability study or user feedback. Well, anyway, so at least even if you haven't used it, you know what it is. So you create an account as a job giver, right? As an employer, if you will. You create an account. You post a job. Of course, you have to have a credit card linked, etc. But you have to post a job description, and then you wait for people to bite. All right. So this was the job description we posted. This was a few years ago, so maybe it's not exactly the format you would see today. But basically, it was like this. Very textual. There's no fancy graphics, nothing. We said, you need to rewrite the review. Okay, and we pay you whatever, 5 cents per, I forget now what we pay, maybe 50 cents for rewriting a review. You have to keep the meaning similar. You have to use your own sentences. Your submission, well, we used the count of words here. So we said you shouldn't, give you some parameters, so you shouldn't make it too short or too long. Should not submit duplicates. Your writing must be original. This is just repeating as it. And don't change proper names. That's important, right? So if the review is about Limassol, you don't want it to be about Beirut, right? I mean, obviously, right? So if your review is a restaurant, is a fish restaurant, you don't want it to be a Brazilian steakhouse, right? So those are, this is not good for privacy, but it also, but if you change it, it becomes meaningless. So we want to keep proper names. Okay, so this was a review of a Chinese restaurant. Obviously, if you read it. Yeah, especially if you've been to dim sum, chicken feet, are popular. So this was a review of a Chinese restaurant. Right? And actually, it's hard to say even if it's it's not a very complimentary review, but it's positive somewhat, right? Okay. So this is just an example. So there was one sentence, and then I'm just zooming on. So there was a line that says, a sentence that says, the line was all the way down the block, right? Line meaning the queue, right? The Brits would say the queue. We were willing to sit with other people. So obviously it's a restaurant where people share tables, right? It's kind of popular in the US now, for some reason. Okay, and then this is an example of actually rewritten by M. Turker. It's a bit of a stilted language, so look at it. When arriving, the line was all the way around the block. So we were more than willing to sit with strangers. Yeah, okay. I mean, it still conveys the meaning. It is sort of, it's an odd English. I mean, this is better English than this. It isn't obviously wrong. It's just kind of odd sounding, like when arriving. In fact, that could be an Indian person because they like this particular tense. There are jokes about it. They like this, the present continuous tense. But it's still, they convey the meaning here that the line, there was a queue right down the block, and that we were willing to share a table, basically. So, but it's one sentence instead of two. It's a long sentence, and there are a few extra words thrown in. So this is, again, just an example. I could show you more, but you'll get bored. Question is, did it help? Well, it did. This, let's see, is the top 1 linkability for a set of 40 authors. That used to be 95%. Top 1, that is complete exact accuracy. The exact accuracy was achieved, or exact pick was achieved with 95% success rate out of 40 authors. After crowdsource-based rewriting, it went down to 55%. I say 55 is still kind of worrisome, but there's a huge jump from 95 to 55, which means crowdsourcing does help. Now, with a more realistic setting of 1,000 authors, linkability went from 77.5%, if you remember that number from earlier, to 10%. Now that's more impressive. And this is more realistic. So you have 1,000 potential authors, and before you had 77.5% top one linkability ratio, which is very high, and it went down to 10. So that clearly says that crowdsource-based rewriting helped. Now at this point, because it's not the first time I give this talk, sometimes people ask, well, it's a bit of an artificial world because I'm assessing linkability based on these synthetic features, right? Remember that I told you about. Does it guarantee that some, I don't know, human being, somebody who is trained in language recognition, cannot stare at the two reviews and still see that they're written by the same person? No. A trained human could do better, probably, than a machine learning algorithm in some cases. But the problem is trained humans aren't scalable, right? You're not going to have a trained human sitting there like an automaton for days on end reading reviews. They'll probably commit suicide before their job is over. So this is where the strength comes in, right? There's the scalability of it all. We can do this on a large scale. So now that's linkability went down. So that's the very good news. It made us very happy. But what about the readability part? Is it meaningful? And actually, readability is not exactly the same thing. Sorry, I didn't mean read. It's readability. Is it readable and is it faithful? Those are slightly different things, right? You can rewrite the review that it's readable and sensible, but it's not faithful to the original. You see what I mean? So actually, I should have said here, readability and faithfulness. Right? So it has to still correspond to what the original author meant. Okay, so to assess this, we also used MTurk. We came back and said, okay, let's crowdsource readability. I mean, hopefully not to the same person who did the rewriting, right? But that's statistically highly unlikely. So we dipped back into the MTurk pool, and they said, okay, for each originally written review pair, let there be an MTurker who looks at both and says, are they faithful to each other, and are they readable? Okay, and then assign a kind of a score, right? And it has to be based. Similarity and sensibility, so, okay. And we did this on many, many reviews, and we got this kind of a pie chart. So actually, because most of these MTurkers were fluent, relatively fluent English speakers, and we demanded English fluency in the job task posting. And you know, when you formulate the task, you can specify experience. Like somebody cannot be a total newbie, like somebody who just registered with MTurk. Like you can say certain age, education. You can pick gender, but we didn't care about gender, but we did care about age and we cared about education. So we wanted somebody who actually knows how to read well and rewrite. Right? That's what has a good enough command of the language. So it's not then surprising that you see almost half of the reviews were rated excellent, right? By others. And then good was 40, so between these two, that's a pretty large chunk, and only 1% was rated, well, let's see, 3% were rated also poor and fair, which is something that may need to be thrown out or reworked, which is encouraging. So which means that we hit the right people. They did their job. So the summary. With crowdsourcing, you get the best of both worlds. What's it? You get something that reduces linkability appreciably, and yet produces readable and sensible and sort of relatively faithful reviews. It's low cost. Well, at least for us, running experiments at low cost. It's fast. It's not super fast because it's not a real-time thing. Right? There's a human involved. And it's easy to use. That is true, right? So these crowdsourcing platforms are excruciatingly easy. It's like really trivial to use. You use it once and then you coast. Yes, please.
Given that we have hardworkers rewriting and hardworkers assessing the quality of the writing, do you think that there is some
Overlap.
overlap of error that you may be?
Well, first of all, the overlap between the two pools, that is people who rewrite and people who check, we can enforce that.
Yeah.
Right? There's no problem separating the two. In the sense, if there could be a monoculture effect, that if they're coming from the same, like if these are, for example, all Indian workers, they will have a particular kind of English, and then they might, that is definitely a risk. It's not a huge risk. I mean, let's say in this case, the Indian English is just something that will make you chuckle. You know, it sounds funny, but it doesn't, or it's maybe a bit formal or a bit archaic, but it doesn't distort the meaning too much. Whereas I don't know, if this was Jamaican Pidgin English, then there would be a problem, or maybe some kind of a Scottish weird dialect.
So I have a
Yeah.
question on the board. On a, let's say, usable security setup, who do you think would take? Who do you think would say, I'm willing to take off that cost to provide this type of anonymity?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. It's actually you beat me to it. I was gonna address it in a minute. But yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying so how would it actually be used, right? Who would? Obviously, people don't. You know, if you are a Yelp or TripAdvisor user, you're not likely to pay 50 cents to read the review rewritten. So the way we kind of fantasized about it, because you always have to have a fantasy that says, my reality, right? This is how I, at least when you do research, right? You have to always have this tenuous connection to reality. Was that if this would be like a P2P world, where, you and I are reviewers, I don't know you, we're both Yelp users, and we establish a kind of a marketplace where, I review, I rewrite other people's reviews, and you rewrite other people's reviews. So basically, we wind up kind of helping each other. Now, this could be a bit utopian, and I can't tell you that it's going to happen, but because actually, let's be honest. Okay, at the end of the day, how many people do you think care about privacy? I don't mean people in this room, because here in this room, I'm sure we're all very upstanding, citizens, right? We care about privacy, don't we? I hope you do. But outside, in that world out there, nah. They sell their DNA for $100. And in 10 years, mark my words, in 10 years, they will sell their DNA for $10 for a free account. There'll be people posting DNA fragments on their Facebook. And you can't expose more privacy than that, right? Look at me. I'm susceptible to Parkinson's disease. Huh? Yeah, like yeah.
Our question about the similarity method that you use, for that you use the characters counting and the combination of binary.
Yeah, all kinds of. I mean, I didn't give you a complete list, but.
We see some traditional print-based analysis or text analysis, like the proof frequency and the document analysis.
Yeah.
I suppose the similarity in those cases, that they use traditional algorithms, they use the concepts or the median distance between the results when they count the terms within the document.
Mm-hmm.
So probably this is another approach, another algorithm that would give different results.
Probably will.
On your method.
But also, let's consider something else. In the world outside of social networks, in the world of like what do you call literature and history, people for centuries have been doing this kind of linkability. For example, trying to prove that a certain novel was written by this one person or not, right? Like, I don't know, Shakespeare's play were written by Bacon or all these. Linkability problems in that world are much simpler because you don't have a huge number of potential authors and a huge number of anonymous authors. You usually have one candidate, an anonymous text, and one or two candidate identified texts. Do you see what I mean? Like there's book written by author A, book written by author B, and then some book written by author C, and you're trying to guess where C is A or B. Yeah, and so, but there's a point. There is a point I'm trying to make here. You have a lot of freedom here, right? Because you basically have a very limited set, and you have a large body of work, like a novel or something like that, or a dissertation if you're doing plagiarism or something detection. So you can do luxury things that you cannot do here. For example, you could do word frequencies. Now, word frequencies, what does that entail? That means you have a vector of all possible words in a given language, let's say Greek, and for each word in Greek, you have a count, right, of how many times this word occurs in this book and how many times it occurs. That is a very powerful measure of stylometry. Now, imagine doing that for Yelp reviews. You will require gazillion, God knows how much memory to store this, right? Because you need to do it per user. We already start experiencing blow-ups with our algorithms when we start doing things like trigrams, right? Trigrams are 26 times 26 times 26. That's 26 cubed is a vector of trigram. It already makes things blow up. We had to use compute centers for that.
Actually, I suppose that's my second question. Because what I'm wondering here is if we use traditional algorithms with different frequency similarity.
Mm.
And if we find the similarity measures that we want to, like setting some thresholds to make decisions about the similarity of the text.
Yeah.
And then if we map the text, the concept of the text, with that similarity, probably rewriting a review will belong to the same concept. So linkability in that case would not work.
Correct.
So
Correct.
My question is, how did you study your hypothesis to check the characters? I mean, the results are it's amazing, but normally
actually,
you never think about the characters. And
it was my one of my students, and I had this high and mighty ideas about. I thought, oh, we're gonna count, we're gonna find most popular words, and we're gonna do word counts. I was more like, let's do sophisticated lexical analysis. Let's look at the various parts of speech usage, and also like these word frequencies, and identify most frequently used words. And he tried that, but he was very slow because it had to write custom code. And then he said, you know what? I'm going to try monograms and diagrams. And I said, you're wasting your time. And he said, let me just try. And he did. And he came with these results. I said, this is unbelievable. And I put another student, and I said, double check this guy because maybe he's making a mistake. And he double checked, and the same thing. It wasn't any kind of analytical reasoning that led us to this. It was just trial and error. And this is unfortunately why, I mean, this is just a fact of life. This whole field is not a science. It's more of an art. You try, you make mistakes, you get better results, you go to better, towards that. Yeah.
You examine the option of relating the results that we have to the analysis that we do with the characters with the contextual information of the users that they initially create the review or a post.
You mean metadata?
I mean additional information like my hobbies, my social background, my...
We didn't. No. We strictly looked, because we figured that people who want to be anonymous, they would scramble that. Like, you know what I'm saying? They will provide as little of that as possible, or they would obscure the times. Maybe they will... See, because it's seems easy to, if you're trying to be anonymous, you're operating one of those accounts, and you don't want to be linked, that you would try to post at different times that you would post from your other account. You can manipulate that metadata. You would maybe use Tor to post, because that will give you a different geographical location. You know what I mean? So you could manipulate. If you're already privacy conscious, it's easy to manipulate that other metadata. That's why we didn't take it into account. Yeah. So here we are. This is crowdsourcing. It's based on human participation, right? So that's the, it's a nice, for us it was a nice experiment. Do we think it's going to take the world over right now? People are going to start using it. Of course not, and partly because, again, it's not real, like it's quasi real time, but it's not real time. It requires kind of a P2P operation, which is not likely to happen on a large scale. But you can imagine that a group of, say, privacy-conscious people gets together and does this on a P2P basis. Okay, so what about translation? Now, translation seems more attractive in some ways, right? Because you don't need to have human participation. That's the whole point, right? It's supposed to be automatic. So what does it mean? Well, basically, translation is a circuit. Right? You start with an original language, you pick some other languages, you translate into them sequentially, come back to the original language. Right? So like English to German to Japanese, back to English. Right? So 1, 2, 3 levels of translation. Yeah. Yes, yes. Actually, this is something we had really low expectations. And it turned out to be, it's still not great. And you can try it yourself with Google Translate, but it's not as bad as we thought. And it actually is improving all the time. And I tell you this, I don't want to advertise for Google, but some of my former students work for Google, and they claim that it is constantly being improved. Again, it's like they try to chisel it down a little bit, make it better every month or so, I think, you see some definitive improvements. There have been attempts to do authorship anonymization, rewriting using automatic translation, but only with 2 languages.
this is sort of the people that kind of our competition at Drexel University. They did a pretty good job. They were early. They did it earlier than us. And we looked at varying levels of translation. So here's the idea. We use the Google Translate. There's also Bing, but it's awful. And so the idea, here's a review in English. We're just going to stuck to English. We do pick n random languages where n is first variable and go back to English. Okay, so what do we see? We go out, remember the charts, linkability ratio, so back to this familiar world. With 4 languages, 4 intermediate languages, remember that 77.5 linkability ratio, top 1, goes down to 42. Not a huge jump, right? Not like rewriting. I mean, it goes down, but not that much. You go to 9 languages, and it goes down to 27.5, which sounds kind of nice, but look, 42, 27.5. And the price you pay is 5 extra languages. And wait, I haven't told you about readability yet. So, yeah, you get 9 languages. Sorry, original, 4 languages, 9 languages. This is linkability ratio, it goes down. The curves follow. This is top 4 and top 1. They kind of follow. They have the same slope. Basically, this is a repeat of the previous slide. Okay, readability. We used mTurk. Again, we came back to mTurkers to assess readability of these automatically translated reviews. Okay, so here the good, look at excellent, 2%. Remember the excellent used to be 48%? 2%. Poor, 15%. Fair is probably awful. This is probably the only one we can use. The rest need work. It's only like a third. So that's pretty bad. And that's with 5 languages. No, that's with, sorry, 5 languages, yeah. Here's an example. So remember that familiar sentence, the line was all the way down the block, we were willing to sit with other people. 3 languages, the line was all the way down the block, we are ready to sit with other people. Wait, I didn't sit. Now you may say, wait, it's the same. It's supposed to be, in some ways. So it's faithful, right? It says the same thing as the original. Unfortunately, it didn't change the original, did it? You see? It's still pretty much the same thing. So it kept faithfulness, but it didn't obscure anything. Okay, let's go to 6 languages. The line at the bottom of the box is we sit down with other people who are prepared. That's strange. Okay, not that there's some punctuation challenge here, right? So maybe you know what happened here. Do you see what happened here? The word box got confused with the word block, because block as in the city block is one thing, and box, like a box, is another. But wait, a block of wood and a box of wood, right? Or a block has another meaning. So this is where the translation got a bit drunk, you know. And so this of course makes no sense. What does it mean? A line at the bottom of the box. This is already, it's not as linkable to this. It's rather poorly linkable, and it's also nonsensical. And people who are prepared for what, right? This is strange. And then with 9 languages, line at the bottom of the box, we sit down with other people who are willing. It's actually better than this. Right? This 9 language translation is actually more meaningful than the 6 language, somehow. Yeah, this is odd. Yeah. We use Western languages here. We use the Indo-European. If you go to non-Indo-European languages, if you go, for example, from English to Turkish to Chinese to Swahili, you're going to get gibberish. Gibberish. Nonsense. Okay, because the things like, for example, if you go to a language that has no articles, right? There are languages that have no plurals, no singular and plural. It's context dependent. Like I think Mandarin is like that. And there are tons of languages have no articles. So if you go back to English, suddenly you lose all the articles. That can be okay because it's okay. Sometimes English is parsable without articles, but it can change the meaning. So we didn't play with those languages.
For example, if you use languages which are based on Latin, which are Chinese languages,
Yeah.
the meaning would be like.
It should be. It should be. But what you see already is that it's not the case. And we used, again, I said we used Indo-European languages, which essentially is not Latin, but, okay, we didn't use Hindi here, which is also Indo-European, but we used Western languages mostly. So we excluded, let's say, all the Arabic, Hebrew, Asian languages, right? Because they have very different structure. Yeah, so this is the conclusion. The state of the art is still not very good, right? I mean, it's fine for translating a casual sentence or a word online, but if you want to translate a passage, you get gibberish even with a couple of languages. Now, with one language, I have to say, I don't want to knock down Google Translate. If you're translating from like some English to Greek or Spanish to Italian, it's fine. It's generally fine. It's only when you do these circuits with multiple hops and we get into trouble. And to be fair, Google Translate wasn't designed for that. Okay, so let me acknowledge that. So, but hey, back to M-Turkers. Maybe given the translated part, right? We can ask them to fix the weird, unreadable things. To fix the parts where block became a box. Okay. That doesn't seem hard. In fact, it's easier than rewriting, right? So we did that, and we published all the anonymous records, and turns out that only of those authors that we tried, only 31 had their translations corrected. The problem was not this. The problem was that translation often did not, as you saw from the graphs, did not fix linkability. Kept the meaning, and when it didn't keep, we could fix it easily, but linkability did not go down. So that's a little bit disappointing. Right, so here's an example. Again, back to the same sentence. This was our weird translation, and this was the fix. And this is reasonably good. Right? This is a human fix. Notice that there's more words here, more one sentence rather than two, and probably stylometrically not so easily linkable to this. But we have human participation again. More graphs. I'll skip this because you've already seen enough graphs. Key results, and we should probably break right at this point, or how does it? Do you want to go, Michael? How do you want to do this?
20 more minutes in one.
Okay.
We could finish 20 more minutes.
Normally on the schedule as a small break
So ideally we'll have done a break, like for
40 minutes. Well, you know what? I'm almost done with this.
Okay.
So maybe what we do is finish this up. It should be like another 5 minutes maximum, maybe less, and then we take a little break.
Yes.
So just to summarize, right? So as far as linkability reduction, crowdsourcing is the best way we saw the best results we've seen. The combination of crowdsourcing and the combination of machine translation followed by crowdsourcing is not as good as crowdsourcing by itself, but better than pure machine translation. And again, this is pretty obvious. And as far as readability, well, machine translation is the worst. The combination of machine translation followed by crowdsourcing is better, but crowdsourcing by itself, the rewriting the entire review from scratch, is best for readability. Finally, as far as automation, that is obvious, right? Translation is the best because it requires no human intervention.
Right, so we did this linkability study to summarize, right? We showed that, actually we had several results. I kind of compressed them in this talk not to bore you too much with the minutiae, but linkability is worse than people originally believed because all the studies before we looked into this space were done with a very small number of authors, 20 to 50. And we were the first to do it with hundreds and thousands of authors. We also looked at this kind of a novel platform of crowdsourcing as a vehicle for mitigating linkability. It seems promising, of course, modular the practical issues like who would really do it. And then we assessed translation, which gave us sort of mixed results, and then crowdsourcing plus translation is more promising, but again, has a bit of disadvantages of both methods. As far as future work, well, this was original sort of presentation was made about 1.5 years ago. I don't know if we will actually do it. I hope somebody will do it. This is because one of my PhD students who wanted to do this had to graduate and get a job. So this is never probably going to happen, at least in my lab. But the idea was, and he actually was halfway done with this, is to provide a sort of a semi-automated service. So here was the gist of it. So you write reviews. Let's say most of us use browsers or plugins to write reviews. We also use specialized apps on the phone, but let's forget about that for a second. So let's say you use a browser. And the idea was to have a plugin or add-on to the browser that would look at all your previous reviews. That would, whenever you log into Yelp or TripAdvisor, it would look into the existing body of reviews. And as you write your new review, it would pop up and say, you shouldn't use this word. How about using this instead? Or maybe this is a good time for you to end the sentence because you're starting to be a bit linkable because of the length of your sentences. Or so it pop up with synonyms and other suggestions as a real-time kind of a outer rewriting help. So the idea was for the author himself, herself, to write reviews in a way that is originally non-linkable, rather than have it be rewritten later. And we had some promising results, but we kind of had to stop it halfway. Yeah. And let's see what else is new here.
That sounds very challenging because to make a couple of suggestions that keep the meaning of the sentence and change the style.
Yeah.
If something like this was possible, then it sounds like a holy grail of typewriting software. I'm not good at writing.
This isn't security the way that I usually do it. It's very soft. Like here, you couldn't design a tool like this and then formally prove that it gives you privacy. You would just have to experimentally show that what it yields is both sensible. Well, it has to be sensible because remember, still you are the one writing it. Right? So you're free to ignore suggestions. The idea is not mandatory, right? You would write something and then you would use the word obscure and they would say, oh, don't use the word obscure, use the word fuzzy or uncertain.
I'm just challenging the sensible part, not the privacy.
Ah, the sensible part.
Because if there was a way, it was an easy way
Yeah.
for typewriters like Word to suggest to use style changes on demand, it would be something that sounds very useful. Say for example, when you read the paper by a European academic, as you say US speaking academic, you can immediately tell the difference. And it's not nice for us, right? We prefer to sound US. And you have something that automates that.
Yeah.
That sounds like a
Yeah. Well, it's funny because if you're a professor like me or like yourself, and maybe you encountered this, maybe you will. A lot of times, what we do is we actually are human versions of this software that do. What I do a lot of times when I write papers is I actually fix stylistic and language issues by my co-authors. So I know how to deal with German co-authors. I move the verb to a different place. I chop the sentence down. I know how to deal with Italian co-authors. I get rid of the fake English, and the French co-authors that there's a different way. I mean, I'm sure Greeks write it, yet they're in their own very peculiar way. So, and that's what I do. I kind of do this kind of
I do it for a different reason, but it's essentially what I do. This kind of anonymization of style, right? Or I remove their fingerprint. So I agree. Maybe it is difficult to do well. Yeah. But we never actually managed to complete it, to evaluate it. So I think it would be interesting to do it. It would be a nice exercise. Yeah. Because we could utilize a large dictionary, right? So if you have this suggestions popping up by a plugin, right, or an add-on, you could take advantage of a dictionary of synonyms and you could say, oh, some synonyms work, because it wouldn't be very intelligent. We just say, look, instead of this word, use this word or use this other word. You say, no, I'm sorry, this word I don't want to use. But maybe end of sentence here, right? This could be useful. Potential. Right. So this brings me to the end. So maybe we should take a little break, and there's some citations which one should always have at the end of the talk. Nobody can see, right? Yeah.
If it's possible, while you are writing a review, for example, it's possible to show on runtime the amount of similarity.
That's actually what we wanted to do. Sorry. Yeah. I'm glad you asked, because in fact this project that I never kind of finished, we wanted to do exactly that. We were going to give you a measure, kind of a scale, like that says you are writing in a way that is very similar to previous, right? Kind of a scale, like showing. Yeah. But okay, let's also be clear on one thing. In the real world, if you wanted to operate two different accounts, one is under your real name, with whatever work-related or personal account, and another one, let's say, as a I don't know, maybe you are. Let's pick some innocuous activity that maybe you're a big fan of balloons. The ones that children play with. There are strange people out there. Maybe you're a big fan of balloons. So you collect them, you post about them, playing with balloons and so on. It's a weird hobby. You don't want people to associate this to your account. I would say the only important thing is that whatever you post under that account should be different from what you post on your personal. But all the postings there, all the text that you post under your balloon lover account, it doesn't matter if they are linkable, right? In fact, it makes sense that they should be linkable because they're posted under the same account. So you actually gain nothing by anonymizing them individually. You see, they should be anonymized or obscured consistently. So it looks like a different person wrote all of them, but the same person, right? Because you gain nothing from making them disparate and unlike each other. Everybody already knows it's the same account. You see, so I think it's very important to be consistent. Like pick a style. You're gonna write like a 15-year-old girl from California. Well, then stick to that style in that other account. And I haven't touched upon that, right? That's a slightly different topic. Okay. Any other questions? If not, we'll take a little break. All right.